The Porsche was parked outside like always. The flat was spotless, minimalist, and expensive. Inside, Aram Shaybani was still in bed. 6:03 a.m., Bowden, Greater Manchester. He heard the first knock, then the ram. Before the police broke through the door, he was already in the bathroom, not to hide, but to flush his entire history. The phone in his hand wasn't just encrypted, it was military grade, wiped on command. He smashed it, forced it down the toilet. The panic was sharp, but not loud. Because men like Shaybani didn't scream, they calculated. He thought the silence would save him. But what police found inside said otherwise. Stacks of cash, high-grade cocaine, a Warhol on the wall, crypto recovery codes tucked in safes, a luxury home masking a global drug pipeline. This is the story of how Britain's most silent kingpin built a criminal empire and lost it all in a single morning. To the banks, he looked like a man with high-end options. Clear credit, clean paperwork, properties in Manchester, London and overseas. On paper, Aram Shaybani was a self-made investor, a high net worth individual. But there was nothing behind it. No company income, no filed tax returns. Between 1999 and 2010, he declared earnings only 5 times, and each of those was linked to mortgage applications. Every declaration backed by forged documents, doctored payslips, fake bank statements, falsified P60 forms. Even the job titles were made up. For a while, it worked. Again and again, he convinced lenders to hand over 6-figure loans. He remortgaged existing homes to release equity, then reinvested that cash into new properties, shifting assets between addresses in Manchester, London and the Costa del Sol. But what looked like growth was really concealment. Most of the homes weren't in his name. Instead, Shaybani used nominees, friends, relatives, even associates with no clear connection to him, to make purchases on his behalf. Later, those same properties would be transferred back to him, legally signed over without any money changing hands. The trail was messy by design. No 2 deals followed the same pattern. Sometimes he bought outright with untraceable cash. Other times, through third-party loans that relied on forged income records. One flat in Kensington, valued at over £1.7 million, was handed to him without a recorded payment. Another was held briefly in someone else's name, then quietly re-registered to a company he controlled. Detectives described it as laundering through architecture. Each property has a layer. Each signature is a disguise. The paperwork looked legitimate until you started asking where the money came from. And when GMP's financial team finally did, the whole thing unraveled. By 2019, Shaybani held over £5 million in property assets, and not a single one could be tied to lawful income. He hadn't worked a day in decades, but thanks to smoke, mirrors and silence, he'd spent 20 years living like a mogul, without ever being questioned. He didn't hide the money. He wore it. Watches, cars, clothes, artwork, nothing subtle, nothing second-hand. Aram Shaybani didn't just spend, he performed. In Ibiza, he rented luxury villas and posted from private yachts. In Los Angeles, he paid $45,000, nearly equivalent to £31,000 for a hair transplant. In Istanbul, another round of surgery, same purpose, similar cost range. He had veneers fitted, booked cosmetic work in cash. All of it is part of the image. Youthful, confident, untraceable. To strangers, he was just doing well. To friends, he said it was property, maybe watches, currency trades. But the numbers never added up. There were no visible business operations, no public footprint, just wealth, constant, shifting and unexplained. He drove a Porsche Panamera and 2 Bentleys, holidayed in Dubai, Amsterdam, Marbella. He bought original art by Banksy and Andy Warhol, not prints, but gallery-grade pieces. When police raided his flats, they found them framed on the walls. Later, it would be revealed they'd been purchased using criminal proceeds. His lifestyle was more than indulgent. It was curated, photos were selected, designer labels are always visible, faces carefully cropped. He posted from rooftops, beach clubs, hotel balconies, never boardrooms, never work. To investigators, it was a mask, but a very effective one. For years, the lifestyle convinced lenders, neighbors, even friends that Shaybani was legitimate. The logic was simple. No one living like that could be running from the law. But detectives were already paying attention. They weren't just watching his spending. They were mapping it. Matching every flight, every hotel booking, every car rental to the cash flow underneath. And the deeper they looked, the more obvious it became. The life he built wasn't made of success. It was made of cover stories, plastic surgery, and Class A profits. The money came from somewhere, but Shaybani's digital trail didn't. Between 2012 and 2015, he traveled frequently: Dubai, Amsterdam, Ibiza. But one trip in particular stood out: Colombia, December 2013. Unlike every other destination, there were no selfies, no tagged clubs, no airport check-ins. For a man who documented everything, this one was different. Detectives noticed the gap immediately, because Colombia wasn't just a holiday spot, it was the source, a country long associated with the highest purity of cocaine and global export networks. They couldn't follow the money, but they could follow the silence. Encrypted chats, burner phones, and offline transfers made the trail difficult, but geography told its own story. He wasn't flying in to party, he was building relationships, setting up import lines, meeting contacts who didn't need to be photographed. Officers would later link his travel to a series of high-volume purchases in the UK: packaging materials, industrial sealers, financial movement consistent with wholesale supply. He wasn't on the street corner. He was dealing in tons, not grams. Colombia was just one point on the map, but it was the one that changed the way detectives looked at him. Not as a dealer, not even as a distributor, but as a trafficker, close to the source. It happened just after 6 a.m., Tuesday, April 9th, 2019. Multiple warrants were executed across the UK and overseas. The main target, Shaybani's luxury flat in Bowden, Greater Manchester. A converted church, gated parking, marketed as discreet executive living. He was still in bed when the door came off its hinges. By the time officers entered, he was in the bathroom, trying to destroy a phone. Not just any handset, an encrypted Encro device. He smashed it, flushed it, and said nothing. He was handcuffed in his boxer shorts. The life outside, designer clothes, private jets, tailored suits, now collapsed into silence. But the flat spoke for him. Police found over £160,000 in cash in a safe, also found crypto recovery phrases, and a bit of cocaine. Simultaneous raids were carried out at a second apartment in Kensington, West London. There, officers found what they called a party box, a stash of Class A and B drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, MDMA. The flat looked more like a gallery than a home. Artwork by Banksy and Andy Warhol hung on the walls, later found to be bought with criminal funds. 3 separate safety deposit boxes were accessed. Between them, they held over £1 million in clean, organised cash. A third location in Ibiza revealed evidence of tenancy agreements and international movement, receipts, boarding passes, high-value transactions. He hadn't just travelled. He'd built a structure designed to move between jurisdictions without raising alarms. The raids didn't just uncover drugs and money, they stripped away the theatre, and for the first time in almost 2 decades, Aram Shaybani's silence wasn't enough to hold everything up. The money was real, the drugs were real, but what made the operation work was what surrounded them. Before the trial, the case investigation split into 2 critical phases. First, what police could see: the drugs, the cash, the encrypted devices. Second, What they had to trace, the digital trail beneath it all. Let's start with the first. Shaybani didn't just store cash and cocaine, he protected them. Inside his flats, officers found layers of security, hardware built for criminals who never planned to be caught. 11 cash counting machines. Only 3 were physically recovered. The others were traced through receipts and account histories. Machines designed to process thousands of pounds in minutes. Vacuum sealers, plastic wrapping, acetone. Each item could pass as ordinary, but not when found together. They pointed to packaging, processing, a quiet production environment hidden inside residential properties. Shaybani used EncroChat devices and operated under the name Iron Key, a crypto recovery code, giving access to over £1.5 million in digital currency. Police discovered 2 of the devices smashed and submerged in toilets. One Encrophone was still in pieces when it was recovered from the drain. Even after arrest, Shaybani refused to provide PINs or passwords. He gave up on nothing, and some of what was seized will never be unlocked. But it didn't matter, because investigators had already gathered enough from the surrounding data, receipts, backups, duplicate accounts, to map the operation. They weren't luxuries, they were tools, designed to keep the structure standing long after he was gone. But even the strongest encryption couldn't hold against the volume of evidence now coming in. Police raids and seizures were just the beginning. Greater Manchester Police didn't stop with the flats or the safes. They went deeper into files, emails, travel records, and bank accounts. What followed was one of the most complex digital investigations they'd ever run. Over 1 million documents were pulled together, from online shopping histories to encrypted downloads, from flight manifests to duplicate email accounts. Each one a piece of a much larger map. They found overseas transfers routed through shell accounts, mortgage applications filed with identical forged documents, insurance policies taken out on properties not in his name, but paid for by his bank cards. Shaybani's spending told its own story. High-end purchases in Dubai, club bookings in Amsterdam, tens of thousands spent in LA, where his hotel bills matched the same dates as his hair transplant surgery. Even cash that had once seemed invisible started to form a pattern. In 2 separate stops at UK airports, he was caught carrying more than €42,000 in undeclared currency. He claimed it was travel money, but it matched deposits later traced to mortgage repayments and crypto buys. Emails uncovered showed links between his known addresses and property listings under other names. Payment logs matched foreign receipts. Crypto movement was plotted across multiple wallets, each one branching out, layering transactions, hiding origin. It didn't matter that some devices stayed locked. What mattered was what lived around them. Digital footprints, transaction shadows, clues left behind by a man who thought the real world could cover for what he buried online. And slowly, the case began to close in, not through wiretaps or surveillance, but through the quiet certainty of data that didn't lie. The courtroom wasn't built for spectacle. There were no outbursts, no grand defenses. Just silence, the same silence Shaybani had relied on from the beginning. The trial opened in mid-2021 at Manchester Crown Court. It ran for 10 weeks. Shaybani denied everything. He sat through every session without offering a single explanation for the wealth, the drugs, or the encrypted devices found across his homes. He faced 20 separate charges, covering conspiracy to supply cocaine, fraud, money laundering, forgery, and perverting the course of justice. He had also refused to comply with court orders that required him to unlock encrypted devices seized during the raids. Even then, with years of evidence laid out in front of him, he gave up nothing. The jury didn't need access to his passwords. They had documents, travel records, account histories, and a trail of properties linked together by forged paperwork and silent transfers. Prosecutors described the operation as calculated and controlled. Every layer of his lifestyle, the cars, the surgeries, the flights, was funded by criminal profit and protected by deception. When sentencing finally came, the judge was clear. Shaybani was at the head of a large-scale drugs conspiracy. He was handed a 34-year sentence for the core offenses. Another 3 years were added for refusing to provide access to encrypted evidence. But this wasn't the end of his conviction. 2 years after the trial ended, the case reopened, not to reduce Shaybani's sentence, but to go after his money. In April 2024, at a Proceeds of Crime Act hearing, the court ordered Shaybani to repay £3.4 million. It wasn't optional. He had 3 months to pay. If he didn't, he'd face an additional 10 years behind bars. Police had already seized his cash, his crypto, and his properties. But this was about more than assets. It was about dismantling the myth of untouchability, that someone could build an empire on fraud and drugs and still keep what they'd bought with it. The court accepted that this wasn't just unexplained wealth. It was the proceeds of crime, and every pound would be recovered, one way or another. Some say it was justice. Others think it barely scratched the surface. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another network to expose.